Welcome to Godsplaining, Contemplative Preachers, Contemporary Age. Each week, join the Dominican friars as they consider all things Catholic.
Welcome to Godsplaining. My name is Father Bonaventure. This is a special episode of Godsplaining. This is a guest-splaining episode where once a month we come and invite a particular guest from different fields. So we have poets and we have theologians and we have just regular old priests and such. This episode is a special one, though, because we have a professional artist. I'm joined by Mr. Sam Rosenthal, who's a Chicago-based artist. Who's going to join us. And this is, Sam, first off, welcome to Godsplaining.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
That's great. So make a few comments about this episode. It's a special episode. One, because I think you're going to love talking or listening to a real artist. And the idea behind this episode will be to kind of get behind the eyes of an artist and maybe with that get a sense of how we should see the world and maybe also dispel some myths about art that some of us might have, which we'll talk about, and also to introduce you just to Sam's work and American Impressionism, you could say, in general. I think it'll be really beautiful. One thing to say about this episode, of course, is since it's about painting, this might be one that you'll want to watch some of it more than just listen to. Now, we'll be talking, of course, and so you can get plenty out of this episode by just hearing Sam explain the value of art and how an artist thinks and how an artist sees things and all of this. But we'll also have the images. We're talking about some of his images, some of his work, and that will be there. So you might want to, if you don't usually watch us on YouTube because you don't like seeing our faces or because you're driving, you don't want to get in an accident, that's totally fine. But if you'd like to get the most out of this episode, hop on over and take a look at some of this beautiful art. We'll also link Sam's, I'll mention this at the end as well, Sam's website, samrosenthal.com. They'll be linked at the bottom of these pages and on Twitter and all this. So you can go to see his art. We're just going to look at a few pieces of his, but I think you'll enjoy them. So without further ado, I want to open up this conversation with Sam Rosenthal about art and his experience by just starting with, so Sam, what artists were your inspirations, you could say, how you got into art, and then briefly how you became an artist in terms of training. I think people think that artists are people who just always drew well and it doesn't require, and so it's like if you sing well, then you just knew how to do that. You didn't actually have to train. I think artists might think, oh, well, some people like to draw and some people don't. So could you tell me about maybe just your a few inspirations, you could say, of who really affected you artistically, and then just a brief discussion of your training, you could say, in the background.
Okay. I don't know where you want me to start. Some of my favorite painters, especially if you're going American Impressionism, would be people such as John Singer Sargent, probably more than anybody else, is a guy whose work I looked to. He did portraits, he did great watercolors. He started off incredible and just kept adding on to his abilities throughout his life. So he started off at the top and kept rising. So he was a major, and still is a major inspiration. There was a big show of his work when I was 17 that I went to see. Before that, I wanted to be an illustrator. I didn't know that field was, as it was then, was about to disappear and either go away completely or in other elements go straight to computers. I'm showing my age a bit, but that became a big thing right when I was in college and wasn't painting. But in 1987 in Chicago, where I'm from, there was a Sargent show, and that was a huge inspiration. And I was at art school at the time. I graduated high school early, and a lot of what I was learning was very similar, not at the level, but it would lead you to, it was a modern day connection to what was that stuff. So the work wasn't just this historical thing. Whereas in the past, when I was younger, I would look at that type of work, if I saw it, which was rare, and go, well, there was no link to how anybody could possibly do it or create work like that. And it had less of a connection to my contemporary reality. But I was getting that. And not that I'm trying to be a link to the past that way. My work's very much about the present, but it's informed by that. And I love that work, and there's a vitality to it.
Yes.
Like through immediacy, but also a resonance where you can live with it and see more and more and more. So that was extremely inspiring. There was different in Chicago. They have a large French Impressionist collection at the Museum of the Art Institute. But also there were a lot of other countries that had their versions, often concurrently with France, like Russia and Italy had the Macchioli, and those people, their works also were huge. In Spain, there was Sorolla, who was probably the greatest painter I can think of for capturing bright sunlight. Okay. And there was a show of his work when I was in college in St. Louis, where I was in college at Washington University for a couple of years while I got a BA there. And there was a Sorolla show there, and that was hugely, those shows were very influential to me and inspiring.
Right. Okay. Now you mentioned, I think this is a good time to bring the question of Impressionism. So obviously you probably you wouldn't want to describe yourself by some ism label per se, but if people ask what kind of art or what school you're in, I've seen things like urban impressionism on your website, or impressionistic realism, or just impressionism or realism. How do you describe impressionism, and what's different from impressionism, say, from other art that people might see?
Okay. There isn't a clear, there might be if you go to a dictionary, clear-cut definition. People, when they think of Impressionism, they probably think of work by Monet with his haystacks or his paintings of the churches, or Renoir, where it's this very high-key, bright, broken color. And that stuff was Impressionism, and it was from the Impressionist school. But worldwide, it's a way of seeing things as light coming at you. You don't just see things, you see the light. And it's the reflection of light, because that's actually what's hitting your retina. And that would be impression, to paint the way things are appearing to you, as opposed to necessarily what you know. I'm not a pure impressionist, by the way. I don't know if there is. And because I do a lot of stuff based on what I know, but if you try to paint something or draw something as you know it, but not how you see it, oftentimes it will look like something that isn't there, that doesn't belong there, because it isn't visually truthful. The criticism that can come to that, somehow it didn't come to Monet, but it did to Sargent, is that it's just purely superficial, because you're just painting appearances, you're not doing the deeper meaning. Doesn't mean you can't get the deeper meaning or something deeper underneath in a portrait. But there's a lot of ways, but one of the things I tend to counter that with is you see with your eyes, you see through your eyes, not with your eyes. So that's where a camera would if you just had a camera that's sitting there, you aren't even composing or anything, if you're randomly pointing a camera at things, that would be just seeing through it mechanically. It's a bit different when you're seeing through your eyes, and then what's attracting you, what you're trying to get, everything is subordinated to both your abilities and your vision and what you consider important.
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, all of a sudden, I want to go on spin off on a whole discussion about the phenomenological tradition of philosophy that looks at the way things are given to us, that gives us a sense of how things are, and the appearances versus reality, and the fact that these aren't two different things, but actually you get the reality through the appearances. But we're just gonna have to
I'll do a few things very quickly that might.
Please, great.
I don't know. You are affected by everything around you. So when photography came in, that affected photography, and to paint affected Impressionism, because people could go outside and paint. And also the way things were perceived were different. Rustling leaves were different because you had photographs, and that affected actually the way you perceive and see rustling leaves. So the paintings they did were affected by photography. And Rodin, in his book where he was interviewed on art, talked about Muybridge's photographs, which you can find online. There were these motion photographs, and it was of horses galloping, and it looks like a horse jumping up and down. We didn't even know as humanity how they actually were moving their legs until then. But as he said, with Delacroix's paintings of horses galloping, it had the movement in ways that was more truthful to how they move, even if it wasn't technically accurate to they do this. It wasn't a frozen moment in time the way a photograph of them was. And those photographs, the motion photographs, the horses look like they're jumping up and down. But it also there was fake Vermeers around the time of World War II, right after World War II, that came out. And if you look at them now, they wouldn't fool anybody because there were so many telltale signs of the 1940s in these paintings. But because you were in the middle of it, you didn't see your flaws towards trying to do. They were actually, he got away with it for a little while. There's no way it would happen now because there are so many telltale signs of the times, but if you're in the middle of it, you can't see it. I always say, if you want to learn about fashion of the 1970s, you can watch Little House on the Prairie or Happy Days.
Yeah.
Once they strayed from the initial seasons, you'll see everything that veers from what it was supposed to be, the periods they were supposed to be taking place in, is of the exact year that they were filmed.
Right.
It's amazing to see. Yeah. And that's why when people try to do stuff like, oh, my stuff's timeless, I'm not, good luck.
Yeah.
You have no idea what you're in the middle of. You have no idea of your context. When I was about 13, I still do to a degree. I'm 51 now, or I'll be 52 soon. In the early 1980s, when I was about 12, 13, I would see pictures of people in polyester and terrible fashion from the 70s. And I made a vow to myself at that age, don't dress in a way that will make you look and say, boy, did I look stupid 10 years later. And you can kind of guess it to a degree, but you just don't know. I had no idea. There's a lot of things going on in the world now that none of us would have predicted back then. And I remember, like, even in the 90s, they did a painting of somebody holding a telephone and had the curly cue connected. I didn't think that would be a thing of history within 5 years.
Yeah.
You don't know. But
no, that is
there are telltale signs, though. There's certain trends you can go, okay, that's going to be out of style real fast.
Yes. No, and Dominicans, given that in just on the pure style fashion, we wear a habit that's been out of style for a long time, but wasn't style when it was put on. But we stick to it anyway. I want to go to look at
your hair and glasses. Your hair sort of wouldn't have been around even 30 years ago.
Yep, that's right.
Even for Dominican, and then your glasses, those changed.
The glasses, like glasses and ties. Yeah, glasses you can change over time, and we're now back to a thicker one as opposed to Anyway, we don't do this.
Bluetooth, by the way, would probably 15 years ago. No.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
They think you have
exactly.
And 10 years ago, we have no idea. So there's telltale signs.
In a sense, there's telltale signs, and there's a lot of flux, of course, and people are scared of flux and change. But what I like about the art, in the sense you talked about, you're very much into the present, but also with a tradition, with the past, bring that in, the fusion of tradition and future, and that's what I want to look at with your art. So this is where if you have if you want to go down online, you can look at something here. So I want to look first. We've got some pictures. This is you at work here, so working on a painting, and this is maybe the American urban version of in plein air painting. So painting outside. So you notice in this image here, you're painting. We're going to see this actual painting a little bit later. You're painting in a snowstorm here, which is most people I think would probably say not the ideal conditions to be painting. But for you, this was part of well, at least for a period of time, right?
Oh, it's still. I mean, this was the color study for a bigger painting.
Okay.
Oftentimes, I'll rent a U-Haul and do a much larger painting on location. This one, because it was snowing so hard, it was during the Super Bowl a few years ago. We lost power, and I just left home and drove to downtown Chicago and worked on the color study. And I had to keep cleaning off the palette because there was so much snow falling on it. A couple of tourists who were very nice, who happened to be taking a walk, photographed me and then emailed me the image. It was, if I had been doing this out of my head, I probably would have been using different colors. And you can get some, I like to try to get the best I can as far as results. And usually the more, when you work from life, there's a lot of things that are much better besides being completely truthful to what you're seeing. And then if you want to change it, you can change it. And you get these unexpected surprises that make things a lot less predictable. And I probably, if I had not been out there, would have made the painting much brighter, but it wouldn't have been as good. White color doesn't necessarily mean good color, and you're doing relationships. A lot of times to get the brightest color, I'll paint a lot of different grade down colors around it or contrasting stuff. But it's what's there, and it's what creates it. And I'm doing mostly relationships.
No, and I think so. If we move on to your
one other thing you asked about the Impressionism. For me, it's the appearance. So You don't, like when somebody says, oh, that person had pretty eyes, unless you're close up and somebody goes, well, then what color were they? Unless they either have very unusual colored eyes, like the people that have those icy white eyes, or which is very, very rare, or like, I don't know, Elizabeth Taylor had like violet eyes almost. It's more the structure and what you recognize somebody from across the street, the big things, not the tiny details. And it's how it appears. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's great. And I think it turns on. So here we've got so some of your landscape paintings, you could say. This is Walton Bridge in Lake Forest, outside Chicago. And the colors here are just spectacular. And I'm just going to pop through two of these and we'll talk about them. And this is playing around the Magnolia. And then we have one of my favorites here, Wesley and Western. I think it is on a snowy. So Chicago, you love the snow. Chicagoans have to love snow, I suppose. But someone might say, well, these are good paintings, of course, but they're not as good as pictures. And we only have landscape paintings because people didn't have cameras. But once we had cameras, this is kind of a thing of the past. You need to move to, say, abstract art that you can't get pictures on. I suspect you have most of our listeners, of course, are probably not inclined towards that argument and are confused by abstract art and wonder why they have to say that they like it. And I suspect you as an artist can actually give reasons why, well, actually the camera doesn't help with any of the camera doesn't replace this kind of realistic art, we could say.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, you see through your eyes, not with them.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to get documentary detail of things, usually a camera would be more effective. But if you're trying to get how somebody actually is sensing it and perceiving it and absorbing it, hopefully that comes back through because it's filtering through somebody who's got what I would call fresh eyes. Hopefully you end up with something that wouldn't be the same. If you're just trying to slavishly copy a photograph, this was a commission I did a number of years ago. And I ended up combining a few different elements, but the main thing is it's how I perceived it and I designed it and composed it, which you also could do on a computer. But there's something different about painting. I've spoken to you, and this isn't the first time we've spoken. And one of the times I used what I would consider a pure example, who was very denigrated when I was younger. Now that he's been long dead and what he did for a living almost doesn't exist. Norman Rockwell was the example I gave because his stuff was purely commercial in the sense that it was almost always a commission. And it was, if you look at it in person, there's a lot less there. It was done for reproduction. But if he worked almost exclusively, like to an extreme extent, from photographs, and a lot of, like, he would project them and trace them. But if you actually look at his photograph sources versus his paintings, somehow it's hard to explain. There's almost like a magic to it. There's parts I could explain, but other parts I can't yet. Maybe somebody could, but not entirely. There's like a magic when it goes through somebody who's an artist, not somebody who's just trying to make it look like a photograph. Where it became, you probably have a better term because I'm speaking on a religious podcast, but he created iconic images of, say, the Four Freedoms, or he did the civil rights paintings that captured everything of what they were supposed to. And in the 60s, he did a lot of civil rights paintings for the civil rights movement. And as photographs, they're mediocre, but somehow transferred through his brain and his hand, they became something totally different and better and more dynamic.
Yes.
But if you're trying to get pinpoint accuracy of this at that point in this thing, sometimes the painting will be better, sometimes the photograph. But for the other thing, generally, if you have a really good painter, go with that. If you have a bad one, it's your choice.
Yeah, I think, and you got the iconic thing, I think is right, because the pictures, if you go online, you can look at Norman Rockwell, they'll be painting from pictures, but he got the iconic aspect to me seems to be about the form. The artist, the true genius of an artist is being able to grasp, in a sense, the form of reality, which is different than, say, its material stuff. Now, of course, it organizes the material, but it's, as we're come from a Thomistic perspective, we talk about things being composed of form and matter. And the photograph, to my mind, is really on the matter side of things. It collects, as you say, these data points and all of this, but the form is something that has a unity to it, and it's something that is grasped by an intelligence. And the artist, to my mind, what the beauty of the power of the artist is, he or she is able to grasp a form and put it on something. And so with Norman Rockwell's, for instance, everyone remembers like the four freedoms, I think it's freedom of speech, maybe, where the man standing up about to give this speech in a congregational church, I suspect. Now, the picture of that probably wouldn't be that interesting, but somehow he was able to grasp the form of what that freedom is about and put it in a material kind of form that still had this tension between, well, the paint, the color, all of this, but it's really getting at the form. And I mean, I think same thing true in the very general sense about like this painting here with the car. You get motion as you're painting from a painting, say, different than you do from a picture, because in a sense, you're the one composing it in time. And I think you can grasp the form of motion and put it on a canvas in a different way than even pictures just have that static quality. I think it's about, again, I think it's about grasping the form, which is kind of a non-material organizing principle, but something that is, of course, very much due to our own grasping as human beings. And as you say, seeing through eyes. I want to talk about
one other thing. You're also not just, if you're making not just a study, although study can be a finished painting in its own right, you're not just recording an image, you're creating one. And if you're aware of that, then you're composing and making the whole thing come together. And that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I think, and I want to talk about that with portraiture, which you might think is clearly this is outdated with selfies. But I suspect that we'll have lots of things to say about this. So we're just going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Mr. Sam Rosenthal, artist from Chicago, talking about the value of impressionistic, realistic art and how artists see the world and how we see the world in a sense through our eyes as opposed with them. So we'll be right back.
You are listening to Godsplaining. Visit us at godsplaining.org to listen to our episodes, shop our store, and donate to our podcast. All gifts go to improving the podcast and bringing the gospel to more listeners. Thanks for your support.
And we're back with a special episode of Godsplaining. This is Guestsplaining. If you're joining us now, I don't know why you haven't joined for the earlier part, but since this isn't a live show, but go ahead and so enjoy being back with us with Mr. Sam Rosenthal, an artist from Chicago. We're talking about his painting and just Impressionism in general. And we ended with talking about the aspect of painting versus pictures, and the fact that paintings get at the form of things, and paintings are involved in creating things as opposed to just registering things. And that therefore they're a very human product, of course, and an active product. And I think this comes clearly in things like portraiture. And Sam mentioned John Senior Sargent, who is near and dear to my heart. I think if you haven't seen John Senior Sargent painting in your life, you've missed out. And America has no reason to be ashamed of its artistic genius when you have a Senior Sargent. But Senior Sargent did a lot of portraits, and you might think that portraiture is a thing well in the past because we can take pictures of people and selfies and all of this, and it's so much better than a portrait. I think if you look at portraitures, you realize you're getting a different aspect of the human. But I want Sam, since Sam actually paints portraits, and here is one of my absolute favorites. This is Anne Marie, I think it's called. And this is, you could have taken a picture. I'm sure you had many pictures of her in the same thing, but talk about the difference between a picture and a portrait of someone and how you get at this person. Because it feels like to me, you've got something of the essence of her at this particular moment and something about her personality that like a picture just doesn't have. But maybe I'm wrong about that. But go ahead and explain what's the value of portraits and how do you create them and how do we look at them?
For me, they're the hardest. I mean, I do figures in cityscapes which involves moving light, moving figures, and landscape. Everything's in chaos, and you have to get all these windows in perspective. That might be the toughest, but to a large extent, portraits are, because I believe they're human beings are the most sensitive to themselves and to other humans. So if you have anything slightly off, it's obvious to everyone, not just the people who know her. And also you're trying to paint the way someone looks, the way they think they look, the way others see them, and the way they want to look. And in the case of Anne Marie, she was about 18 years old So you're painting who she is and who you probably think she's going to be, like something that's at her core will still be her, even though she won't look exactly the same in 20 or 40 years. It's still going to be her. It's a real it's an extreme challenge. I think this wouldn't even, it would be considered an okay photo of her. I think as a portrait, it's a bit different. You select what you're going to emphasize, how it's going to be handled, and hopefully it'll be, you also want it to be interesting to people that don't even know who they are, just as a painting in and of itself.
Yeah.
And hopefully you feel like you get she was a nice girl. I've known her parents for a long time. I even painted her mom when she was pregnant with Anne-Marie. So it goes back, it goes back a long way. And I painted her younger sister a couple of years later. And also the flowers, but there were little bits. The flowers are from her garden. She has a sort of hippie-ish style. Her mom and dad met when her dad was in the Peace Corps in Chile. And her mom was a dental hygienist at the time. And they fell in love and came back to the Chicago area where he was from. And so I tried to have little bits and pieces of all these things in the painting that was reflective of her family, and her, like the house she grew up in where they had a great garden, and that's where the flowers are from. And she's a nice person. So yeah, that was how I did that.
Well, no, I think, and I mean, there's an old trope where Indian, the Native Americans, or you could say, didn't want to get in pictures because they thought pictures would steal their soul. And looking at this portrait and looking at Senior Sergeant, I always feel like actually they should have said, don't paint us. Pictures don't get the soul. Pictures get like material constitution. But when we talked about that form aspect, the personality, the form of the person that structures this. I mean, I don't know how I'm sure she enjoyed this painting, but and saw it as reflected. But there's just something. It feels like it's in motion. It feels like it's active. It feels like this is real. I feel like I kind of have a sense, if I met her, I would already have a knowledge of not just what she looked like, but who she is. And I feel like pictures tell you what people look like. And if you construct them right, the right time candids, you can kind of catch maybe someone who's. But with a portrait, when done well, you get like an essential feature. I think you get to the essence of that. The personality, I should say, the formal aspect of it. And I just get a sense that there's this kind of impishness to her. Not quite sure. I don't know. It's even hard to put into words because people are.
I wanted to have her face where you can tell she's about to change, like she's about to say something, and her face.
Yes.
She's between expressions.
Yeah, that's
you get the movement, but also she was a very nice just person, and I wanted to get that. And there are good photographic portraits, but it is different in a large part because you're constructing it from nothing into something, as opposed to a photograph where you have it all, and then you, to some degree, editing. In both cases, you edit it down, but this one you're doing it it's like cooking from scratch.
Yes.
And that can end up with the best meals or the worst meals, as opposed to have to mix.
Yeah, if you have a good chef, it ends up with the best meals. If you have me, it ends up with the worst. I want to compare this. So this is this picture, by the way, yours, and you're going to hate this comparison because Senior Sergeant is.
I suffer a little bit on this.
But this reminded me the Lady Agnew of Lucknow of Senior Sergeants. This is just one of his masterpieces because he catches an expression. She seems like she's between expressions. She's about this movement. And I thought these very similar. We'll give Sergeant
Okay, well, I mean, there might be some similar. They had some Louis Betts paintings, which were almost at sergeant levels in their family.
Okay.
Of the great grandparents of her, or her great grandparents, I think. But yeah, the handling of the skirt of her skirt is similar to the background fabric in the chair. On this one, if you want to talk about being between it, if you look at her, the way she has both her head tilted down and looking straight at you at the same time, which is quite there's a lot of things that are amazing, like the brush stroke going down the where the bow or whatever, the wrap around is tied and it's hanging down. There's this just economy of brush strokes. It's just beautiful and amazing. And he used a very limited palette and maximized it, which created a unity and strength. But if you look at her face, it's like her head is tilted down looking at you, but at the same time, it's as if it's straight up and down.
Yes.
And looking, so it's a weird, and it shouldn't work, but it does combination.
It does.
And if you look at how he paints hair, he doesn't paint it's all masses. It's all just what's important to the picture. Slight bit of light hitting it to create the form. Other than that, it's a solid mass of varying soft and hard edges between her head, her face and the hair and the background in the hair. But it's done with so little, but everything is just, he had incredible taste and incredible hand, just an incredible hand. I'd say he had great aim, and he knew he's so good. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I don't think this is bad either. This is not a senior sergeant, but this is Sam Rosenthal. This is Sam Rosenthal again, but this is again this is called the Curmudgeon, and again
this is
now
not a commission. People usually don't pay to be painted that way unless they have a really good sense of humor.
Right. No, but I love this. I suspect this man loved this. But this one actually is interesting because whereas in this one, she's clearly it's her, and the flowers in the background, of course, are bringing to it. Whereas here, he's much less of a central aspect. I mean, he's a central aspect, but there's this giant space that he doesn't contain at the moment, and yet that distance adds to him of like, well, you wouldn't want to be sitting. He doesn't want you sitting next to him there. He's suspicious. There seems to be like you're moving towards him, but the motion is incredible.
He's basically doing everything he can to shield himself and not be open to you. If you look at it, he's basically like protecting himself, and he's cornered. He's on the corner of the couch. He's not in the corner. Well, his feet are on the far side. He wants you to keep a distance, and he's actually a super nice guy. This might be a little weird for your podcast. He was a priest. He married a woman that was a nun, and then became a lawyer and a law professor. But he was very active with the church around the corner from our house, and very helpful. And just he lived behind the alley from us when we used to live in Oak Park, Illinois. Super nice guy, good neighbor. Wow. And he said it looked just like his twin. He has a twin brother.
Oh wow. Well, the face, the light on everything else it's like the darkness. You're directed right to the face, which is fantastic. Okay. I want to talk, finally turning to what I think is another brilliant achievements, a beautiful aspect of your work. We talked about urban impressionism, and people think, okay, we talked about landscapes and everyone knows there's natural beauty. And then we talked about people and how you get the form and how portraits are so, and hopefully people will go out and think more about portraits. But a lot of your work, because you're in Chicago, is on cityscapes, and so this is this is a painting. This is a Michigan Avenue Bridge that you were painting a color study for that we saw earlier. But a number of your paintings are in the city, and even just bridge kind of, girders. These are
there was
rivets.
A club called the Green Dolphin, so there's green light hitting the bridge.
Okay, this is the Green Dolphin Bridge, yes. And this, so I'm going to put again another impressionist here. This is Gustav Caillebotte, who also did very similar work, but made. This is another one of yours as well. This is this is Twilight on the Lasalle Bridge. But you have a number of cityscapes, and I think people would think, well, I could get natural beauty, but what the beauty of a city and the kind of emotion and motion and the reason. So why paint cities, one? And is it harder to get the beauty to paint cities than it is to paint nature, or is it just different?
It's different. It can be harder in the sense that, how I said that people are very sensitive to humanity and human faces, and I'm putting people in these, but also there's perspective in a lot of windows, and there's architects that could really do the perspective great, but they aren't going to get the light effects. And there are people that go out and do plein air paintings, and these are done. I would rent U-Hauls and go on location for most of these, almost all of them, except for that snow one where I did the color studies. Like that one. And that one's 10 feet wide and 5 feet 4 inches tall. Oh, it's bigger than that. It's 6. What am I saying? It's way bigger than that. It's, I think, 6 feet tall now. And I would rent a U-Haul and go back and forth. And there's my daughter's one of the characters, and she posed for a lot of them, but she's the main one, right? Well, I'm pointing at something nobody can see. Not that one, the next one.
Okay, this one.
What? Yeah, her.
Okay.
And she was about 12.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to get a fleeting light effect. I'm trying to get, and all these different light sources, which confuses you. Just have to give up what you know and see through the eyes of an educated child and say, this is what I see. These are the relationships, not what I think is there. You have to get what's there.
Mm-hmm.
And a camera is not going to get those things. And you have to make choices because you don't have the color and value range. It's one of the hardest things. If you look at, there's a lot of people in it. It's
Mm-hmm.
one of the, but and when you do it this big, where it's almost just about life size, you feel, I like it because it feels like you can walk inside the painting. You can look
Yes.
at a picture as a whole and get closer, look at looser and more painterly as you get, and less like a photo, not that it looks like a photograph, but it won't look at all like it in person when you get close. But you can walk in, like you can walk inside it. And that's also part of the composition where you have the spiral staircase as if you're going to go down it.
Yes.
And it was a huge channel, very complicated. I'm trying to simplify things a little more.
Mm-hmm.
These days.
Yeah.
Complicate doesn't mean better or worse. It's how you do it.
Yeah. Well, this is, and
it's simple, stronger.
Well, and I love how you mentioned, you're trying to get at what's actually there, because again, the phenomenology, if those are familiar with, and our listeners might be familiar with Pope John Paul II, who brought phenomenology and Husserl's study into the Catholic Church, really, in the sense that he said, going back to the things themselves, but through how we perceive them. So it's a study of how things appear to us as they are in themselves. And so that by focusing on our relationships to them, we actually get closer to the things themselves, as opposed to treating them as just pure objects. And then actually, we're not actually treating them as they are at all. So the paintings here about the lines, if you look at cities, I think must be tough because you have so many hard lines to do. And as you can see, the lines, they don't always match, but it's because it's about your perception, your experience of them, and the movement towards them, because lines change as you move with them. And you have to capture that in the painting itself.
There's a few other things. And this is where hopefully I'm good at everything. I'd like to think so, although I have bad days a lot.
Mm-hmm.
In city, like if you're in this day and age, people are onto, oh, what a beautiful landscape. And if they live in it, they might forget about it, but then they can be reminded, oh yeah. Cities, people are trying to get to and from one destination to another, and they don't seem to, beyond a few, times here or there, realize, wow, look at all this. Only if something changes, like there's a building that's not in this painting, but it's across the water, just off of where the painting is on the right, where they project things on it at nighttime during the summer. You can see these weird little movies that are projected on the entire Board of Trade building. I mean, not Board of Trade. Oh God, I forget.
Federal Trade Building, is that
Merchandise Mart?
Okay.
But that's what attracts people, not unless you're a tourist. And I try to do things where they aren't super obvious usually about what the landmarks are.
Yes.
But
I didn't see any water towers.
Yeah. People, or the Sears Tower or something here in Chicago, or the Capitol in DC. But it will make it so then everything has been designed. In our lives, it's become much more that way. It used to be if you had a garbage can, it was very utilitarian. Now even those, if you stop to think about it, almost even the cheapest one at Target or Walmart is designed. It's aesthetically planned. We have an overkill of it, but people forget about that and don't really appreciate it because they're just they're in the moment, but they're not present. And this hopefully can get them back to that enthusiasm. I first started going to Chicago on my own, which I think would get my mom in jail these days, because I live 30 miles away, when I was about 11 and a half. Can't do that as a parent anymore. I would just take the train, and it was just this cool thing to be in the city. I try to capture some of that freshness of spirit and eye.
Yes.
Educated and through experience, but still that enthusiasm and spark of life that try to translate that for other people. And people do that all the time through music or other means, but that's where painting comes in for me, is to help. And people see me, except for, generally speaking, even not all of them dislike it, but it seems to be basically every walk of life. I've had CEOs, priests,
Mm-hmm.
prostitutes, gang members, policemen, they all like to see what I'm doing and enjoy it.
Right.
And that's a very unifying thing because it's rare, but also they don't, it gives them that sort of, it's a direct way of communicating in a sense that other people don't have.
Yeah. And that's, I mean,
And
the
it's
idea.
not,
Yeah.
here's where I think you're getting at the beginning. I'm sorry. You're talking about it being a gift, and that can be annoying, kind of like when I do paintings and they say it looks like a photograph.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's annoying, but I understand they don't mean harm. And you have to have some sort of vision or aesthetic for what you're doing, unless you're just copying other people. But it's a lot of work. And same with, like, if you have an athlete, you can have a gifted athlete, but the tip top guys have combined that with a ton of work that people don't seem to see that with this stuff. I think in large part because a lot of what they're told is really good is not so good.
Yeah, that's right. I think they're told art, again, we started with this, that art is just something some people have and others don't. And so if you think about a lot of modern art, it just doesn't look like it requires a lot of skill. And so they think that maybe art's really that easy. But a professional and an expert in any field is someone who has a ton of training and is able to ideally make it look easy for the person. So that a good painter, to my mind, is able to let people see things around them in a way they hadn't seen before, without having to do all the composition work, in a sense, bringing out again the essence or the forms of things in the way that, say, a good philosopher is supposed to bring out the distinctions in thinking and thought, so that other people can just step in and almost say, well, yeah, it's obvious. Like, and when you look at this kind of realistic art, as you say, or the Impressionist art, some people say, well, yeah, what's so special about that? Well, actually, a ton is special about it because it requires an expertise to be able to do this for the purpose of seeing things again for the first time, as we should, as human beings. And it brings out the beauty of the human condition and our experience of each other and nature, and in a way that most people couldn't do. So that's the gift. The gift of the artist, I think, is to bring out forms and let people see through their well-trained and gifted eyes, so that we don't have to make it from scratch.
Also, I think an appreciation for how much the beauty that's around you, and also maybe you don't think about it even when looking at the work, the amount of work that went into the world you're able to walk in on the shoulders of architects and construction. And, people died making those bridges.
Yeah.
Just a lot of stuff that has been designed and worked for you. I think maybe with the land, like there used to be cityscapes 400 years ago that were, and 300 years ago, they were very hyper detailed and extremely appreciated. I think maybe landscapes are more that way now because you didn't really see too much straight landscapes in Western art. You did see it in Chinese and Japanese ink paintings, but where it was just a straight landscape, they sometimes had as backgrounds for figures like Mona Lisa, but those that of that era, but not in and of themselves until the Industrial Revolution, probably because it was under threat. So people didn't necessarily appreciate it the same way. It was more of a threat, something that could kill you, that you were dependent on, but it wasn't something that you had under control. And at the time when cities were novel and urban living, that was, I think, covered more that way during the 1600s and later.
Yeah.
And I would say, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure on that, but it seems like it's an idea.
Well, Sam, I mean, I want to talk, and I'm sure the listeners and hopefully viewers at this point, if you started listening, you probably shifted over to watching, I hope, more about to hear an artist talk about the creation, about colors, about all this, about constructing, about seeing things, and the way you compose. We could go on forever, but our listeners do have commutes, and it is probably time to wrap up. So I want to note that, so for our listeners, and thank you for this, and our listeners, this is, if you go, you'll notice in the bottom of all the feeds and such, you'll see samrosenthal.com. You'll have a link to his website. You can just type in Sam Rosenthal Fine Arts or Sam Rosenthal Art, and you'll get the website as well. There you'll have linked all the information about Sam, his different exhibits that he's been around. And also, Sam has a studio just outside Chicago, and he's going to be doing a one-man show, I think, this is coming in the next month or two. So that'll be on the website as well. But Sam, do you want to say anything about your studio in Chicago, or could people come and visit you or anything like that? We have some Chicago listeners, I'm sure.
I have I have a studio which I work out of in Lake Bluff, Illinois, in a gallery space that has about 50 or 60 paintings in Vernon Hills, Illinois. They're both a couple towns from each other, and they're about 30 miles north of Chicago. So if you're anywhere near, just contact me. We can make an appointment. It'd be great to meet you, talk to you, anybody. Love to hear from you on the phone, or anyway, it would just be nice. And yeah.
That's great.
That would be great.
Fantastic. And I'm absolutely delighted to have you on here. So thank you for coming on and sharing. And we're going to have you on again to talk about Husserl and seeing the eidetic reduction. I've got plenty of thoughts about that. So we'll bring you back. But for us here at Godsplaining, we're praying for all of you listening. If you like this episode, or if you have other people that would like this, you have some artists, we get different perspectives on Guestsplaining. So please feel free to share this episode with anyone who doesn't normally listen to these podcasts or watch these podcasts, and like us on Facebook and Twitter and all those kind of general social media things. Someone else is usually doing this part, but I'll thank again, Sam Rosenthal, for joining us. And I hope everyone is having a great summer and a great August as they prepare for the fall semester. So we're praying for you. Pray for us. God bless.
Thanks for listening to Godsplaining, a work of the Dominican friars of the province of St. Joseph. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Leave a review on your podcast app, and visit us at godsplaining.org.